Howdy. This is the video digest for the second week of the HPCH 640 class. The topic of the week was the Mediterranean diet and DASH and Omni diet. The first question is, what is the Mediterranean diet? The Mediterranean diet originally refers to the traditional Cretan diet of 1960s. But now it really can refer to a lot of different things. And according to 2010 dietary guidelines for Americans, a Mediterranean diet emphasizes vegetables, fruits and nuts, olive oil, and grains with small amount of meat and dairy products. It incorporates a high monounsaturated to saturated fatty acid intake ratio, and it typically incorporates wines with meals. And as you can assume from its high emphasis on olive oil, it is not a low-fat diet. The second question is that, do we know for sure that the Mediterranean diet produces longevity? Well, according to the short literature review by the DGAC 2010, there seems to be a general trend of literature supporting the idea. However, we also know that there can be a lot of limitations to these studies as well as comparison of these studies. First of all, it is extremely difficult to isolate, if it's possible, to isolate effect of diet on longevity and control for covariates and other potential risk factors. The second issue is we don't have a standardized definition of what constitutes a Mediterranean diet is, and along with the line, we do not have a standardized assessment tool for measuring the Mediterranean diet. And other than these issues, we still have other issues that pertains to study designs, and it is difficult to compare studies that use different methods, different measurements, and different outcomes. For question number 3, we were asked if we know what we generally call the Mediterranean diet decreases CVD or other risk. I think along with the same line of what the answer for the question number 2, it is difficult to say it definitely. But again, according to the 2010 DGAC guideline, DGAC, they did short literature review on it, and it seems to be like there is a general trend that supports that a Mediterranean diet reduces a CVD risk and other health risks. However, even if it is true, we still do not know what attribute of a Mediterranean diet can be linked to these protective associations for mortality, CVD risk, and other health risks. So yeah. The question number 4 is, so I need to give an example. So an example of Mediterranean breakfast would be fruit yogurt with granola, and lunch is spinach and fig salad, and dinner maybe a lemon fish with wine. Sounds like it. I have 2 questions left. So question number 5, what is the difference between Mediterranean diet and DASH? DASH stands for dietary approach to stop hypertension, and it's very similar to the Mediterranean diet, that it also emphasizes the high vegetable, high fruits, and fat-free or low-fat dairy products with small amount of saturated and total fat. However, typically DASH has higher amount of vegetable and fruit intake, but it really depends on what Mediterranean diet that you're looking at. The biggest difference between the two will be the fat intake. A Mediterranean diet typically has higher fat intake than a DASH. I think it's mainly due to the olive oil intake. The last question is asks about the difference between the DASH and Omni. Omni stands for the optimal macronutrients intake diet for heart disease prevention. And the researchers who introduced DASH introduced Omni, and Omni is a tweaked version of DASH that it still follows the basic principles of DASH, that it emphasizes high vegetable, fruits, and fat-free or low-fat dairy products. What researchers did in their original research was that DASH typically has high carbohydrate contents of over 55%, and the researchers they they replace this 10% of carbohydrates to the high quality protein or the MUFA, the monounsaturated fatty acid. And the original research showed that the replacement of a portion of carbohydrates in DASH to these alternatives has reduced significantly the amount of bad LDL, which stands for the low density lipoprotein. And just to be noted, the high LDL level is known to increase the cardiovascular disease risk. That's it for my BLO, and I'm going to share something new. So this week we learned about 3 different healthy dietary patterns, and I can get curious and I start to wonder, so what would be the difference between the associations or effects of these dietary patterns on health? But then we also know that it's difficult to compare these different dietary patterns because they use different dietary assessment tools. And while searching for literature, I encountered this paper somewhat addresses the both concerns. The objective of the study was to examine the relationships between 4 different dietary pattern indices with all-cause CVD, the cardiovascular disease, and cancer mortality. The 4 dietary pattern indices that they looked at were EHCI 2010, which stands for the Healthy Eating Index 2010, and Alternative HEI 2010, Alternative Mediterranean Score, and DASH score. So each of these index represents different definition of what constitutes an optimal dietary pattern is. And I think by looking at the relationship between these 4 dietary indices with mortality, it kind of sets up an evidence for the association of different dietary patterns with mortality, but also the comparison of different these dietary pattern scorings. The study used the data from the NIH-AARP Diet Health Study. It was a national level data set that collected data from let me go back. So it's a national level data set that collected data from multiple states within the United States. The researchers recruited so the study population were the older adults who were AARP members. AARP stands for the American Associations of Retired Persons, at the ages of 51 and 70, and they followed these people to 15 years until the 31st of December 2011. So and the study population were excluded if they had previous history of CVD or cancer, or if they were at the extreme lines of this the calorie intake. So they measured the 2 things. One is their dietary intake to calculate these 4 dietary pattern indices, and they collected vital status data. And the correlation between, by the way, before that, so over the 15 years of the follow-up, they were reported over 86,000 deaths. Yes, over 86,000 deaths, and among these deaths, there were over 23,000 deaths were due to CVD, and there was over 29,000 cancer deaths. So correlations between the pairwise correlations between these 4 indices ranged from 0.53 to 0.69, which was strong positive correlations, and this kind of makes sense considering that these 4 dietary patterns are not identical but do share some common grounds, and these 4 indices were designed to represent these slight variations in definitions of these optimal diet patterns. They also learned that regardless of what dietary pattern is, those who scored, those who has better dietary pattern, they were more likely to be older, leaner, more physically active, and they received higher education. After controlling for these factors, they learned that those who have optimal dietary pattern has reduced risk of all-cause CVD and cancer death, cancer mortality compared to those with poorest dietary pattern. And they also try to look at each diet component for each score, and they failed to identify any specific dietary construct or component that drives the protective association for mortality. And I think this somewhat maybe highlights the role of overall diet on health. So obviously this study has a lot of limitation as well, but I think it reveals some interesting points in the topic. So if you'd like to read the paper, I will cite the paper under the video description so you can refer to it. I think basically that's it. If you have any questions or comments for the video, please leave the comments below and I'll check it. And thank you for watching. Have a great Sunday night.